League of Legends has had some truly degenerate metas over the years. Strategies so broken they forced Riot to rewrite entire game systems just to kill them. Today, I'm ranking and explaining the 10 most broken metas in League history, from creative exploits to full-blown balance disasters. And we're starting with one that turned the entire game into a completely different experience. Funnel meta. Here's the thing about Funnel. It wasn't just overpowered. It was a completely different game mode you were forced to play against your will. The idea was simple but disgusting. Take 2 income streams, mid lane and jungle, and deliberately pour every single resource into one hyper carry. Usually a Master Yi, the strategy worked because Riot accidentally built the perfect pipeline for it. Buff support items meant champions like Karma could skip last hitting entirely and just babysit their carry full time. Hunter's Talisman gave mana-hungry carries infinite sustain. Scuttle Crab changes dumped even more free gold into the system. Every piece fed the monster. It exploded publicly during the 2018 LCK Summer Split opener. Master Yi and Taric mid. The resource gap was so absurd it looked like a Smurf game in professional play. Riot tried targeted nerfs in patch 8.13, barely slowed anything down. The real fix came in 8.14 with the Monster Hunter passive, which slashed gold from lane minions if the jungle item holder was already the richest player on their team. That killed the core mechanic. The dark irony? Riot's own support item buffs, designed to make a boring role more appealing, accidentally created one of the most miserable metas in the game's history. But if Funnel sounds bad, wait until you hear about a bot lane combo so oppressive it warped an entire season of competitive play. Lucian and Nami. Most broken bot lane duos happen because the ADC is overpowered. This one was different. Nami was the engine, Lucian was just along for the ride. Here's what happened. Riot reworked Lucian's passive so that whenever a nearby ally healed, shielded, or buffed him, Lucian got a free double shot proc that dealt bonus magic damage. Sounds fine on paper, but then someone paired him with Nami, and the entire bot lane meta collapsed. Nami is a buff machine. Her W heals Lucian. Her E, Tidecaller's Blessing, directly buffs his auto attacks with bonus damage and a slow. Every single one of those triggered Lucian's passive. So Nami would toss a heal. Lucian gets a free proc. She buffs his autos, another free proc. She could layer these abilities back to back to back, with zero downtime. But here's where it gets really nasty. The synergy created a feedback loop that fed itself. Lucian's insane damage output forced enemies to play defensively and back off the wave. But defensive positioning made them easier targets for Nami's bubble and ultimate, because they were predictable. More poke meant more healing and buffing. More buffs meant more procs. More procs meant more damage. More damage meant more fear. The cycle never stopped, and you couldn't just play around one thing. Most bot lanes are either burst or poke. Lucian and Nami were both simultaneously. There was no safe window. The duo hit first pick or first ban priority across multiple competitive regions throughout 2021. Riot eventually had to chip away at the synergy piece by piece, adjusting Lucian's passive cooldowns and Nami's buff uptime rather than gutting either champion outright. A surgical fix for a surgical problem. But if you think a 2-champion combo warping bot lane is bad, wait until Riot decided to rework 4 champions at the same time and accidentally broke an entire class. Juggernaut meta. Riot tried to fix 4 of the most boring champions in the game and accidentally created a monster. The goal was simple. Add skill expression to Darius, Garen, Mordekaiser, and Skarner. Champions that had always felt like pure stat checks where whoever had better numbers just won. Noble intention, terrible execution. Darius got the worst of it. His reworked Blood Rage passive now stacked attack damage through Noxian Guillotine kills and max hemorrhage stacks, turning him from a lane bully into a scaling snowball machine that got stronger with every fight. One good team fight and Darius became an unstoppable force for the rest of the game. But here's the thing. The champion reworks weren't even the real problem. The items were. Sunfire Cape got buffed across patches 5.22, 6.1, and 6.3. Iceborne Gauntlet was sitting at 65 armor, 20% cooldown reduction, and a slow radius that scaled with the holder's armor. 2 items. That's all it took. Those 2 items gave you damage, durability, mana, cooldown reduction, and crowd control all at once. There was literally no weakness in the build. Then Grasp of the Undying showed up and removed the last thing keeping tanks in check: low offensive output. Tanks could now convert their health directly into trade damage, so they hit hard, they never died, and they outscaled you anyway. The result? Picking anything other than a tank in top lane was voluntarily losing. You could land every ability on a Sunfire Iceborne tank, and their aura would just slowly burn you back while they walked at you. Riot's fix was to force tanks into choosing between damage and durability by gutting the damage on tank items. That took the better part of 2 seasons to fully implement. And the fallout from this update didn't just create one bad meta. It was the origin story for the broader tank meta, ranked higher on this list. But if the Juggernaut era was the spark, wait until you hear about a meta where you couldn't even get close enough to fight back. Poke meta. This meta wasn't broken because something was too strong. It was broken because it made the entire game feel pointless. Season 3's poke meta revolved around one simple concept: stand at maximum range, throw abilities, and slowly chip the enemy team's health bars down until fighting became mathematically unavoidable. That's it. That was the whole strategy. Nidalee, Ezreal, Lux, Xerath, and Jace became staple picks because their abilities could pass through or around minion waves, meaning you literally could not walk anywhere on the map without eating free damage. Here's the thing. It worked. It worked so well that professional matches regularly stretched past 50 or 60 minutes, even when one team had a clear gold lead, because the losing team could just farm from a safe distance, avoid every fight, and slowly claw their way back into the game without ever committing to a single direct engagement. Zero risk, zero interaction, just wave clear and retreat. The viewing experience was brutal. Large stretches of competitive matches featured both teams standing at max range, trading one round of abilities, then immediately walking backward. Nobody pressed buttons. Nobody engaged. Teams would posture around objectives for 10 minutes straight and accomplish absolutely nothing. It was like watching 2 people play catch, except neither of them wanted to actually throw the ball. The meta eventually died when itemization changes reduced poke reliability, and newer champions introduced engaged tools that punished teams for standing still. Turns out, giving players actual ways to close the gap solves the problem of nobody wanting to fight. But if the poke meta bored you to death, the next one made you want to quit the game entirely. 6. Ardent Censer. Kalista was banned in every single group stage match at the 2017 World Championship. Not most of them. Every single one. 24 games, 24 bans, and she wasn't even the best ADC at the tournament. She was banned because Riot accidentally created a meta so warped around one item that letting Kalista touch Ardent Censer was considered a death sentence. Here's how it happened. Ardent Censer had been slowly getting buffed for years. Its attack speed bonus went from 15% to 25%. Its gold cost dropped, and Riot slapped a healing on hit, passive onto it for good measure. But the real disaster wasn't the buffs themselves. It was Riot's patching philosophy. They froze the Worlds patch at a version that was actually more overtuned than what teams had been practicing on. So pros showed up to the biggest tournament of the year, playing on a patch where Ardent Censer was even stronger than they expected. The result was the most strategically stale Worlds in history. Every single game became protect the ADC. 5 players spending the entire match babysitting one person with a crossbow. Kog'Maw, Tristana, and Twitch dominated because they scaled hardest with Ardent's buffs. Lulu, Karma, Janna, and Rakan were the support engines, keeping them alive. That was it. That was the meta. And the worst part? Diving champions and aggressive mid laners became completely useless. A single Janna could press one button and nullify an entire enemy dive attempt, while the hypercarry melted everyone in 3 seconds. Assassins? Irrelevant. Engaged tanks? Pointless. The game looked like a completely different sport. Riot's caution was the real villain. They refused to make bold changes before the tournament to protect competitive stability, and in doing so, they guaranteed the exact opposite. Post-Worlds nerfs to Ardent's attack speed and healing brought it back to reasonable levels, but the damage was done. The 2017 World Championship will forever be remembered as the tournament where one support item held the entire game hostage. But if you think a single item warping one tournament was bad, Wait until the damage itself became the problem across the entire game. Damage creep. This one didn't have a villain. No single item to point at. No one champion to ban. No patch note that made everyone lose their minds. The damage creep meta of Season 8 was a slow boil. Every 2 weeks, something got a little stronger. Then something else. Then something else. And then one day, you loaded into a game and realized you were dying in 0.8 seconds and had absolutely no idea when it started. Here's what happened. Riot had been quietly buffing damage across every single system in the game simultaneously. Jungle income changes let junglers hit power spikes faster without ever needing to build a defensive item. Crit items became more gold efficient, meaning ADCs reached their damage thresholds earlier than ever. Support item buffs, originally meant to make the role more appealing, accidentally turned supports into legitimate damage threats instead of utility providers. And then the preseason rune overhaul multiplied all of it. Keystones and secondary tree selections pumped offensive scaling into every role with zero equivalent defensive offset. The result was a game where falling behind by even a small gold margin meant you were dead before you could press a button. Item timelines and champion select matchups mattered more than your actual hands on the keyboard. Mechanical skill became secondary to who hit their power spike first. Tank supports got hit the worst. You could build full tank items on Leona or Braum, and a mid laner would still delete you with a single ability rotation. Your durability was cosmetic, a suggestion. It meant literally nothing against the raw damage output every other role was generating. And here's the exhausting part. Fixing this took years, not patches, years. Riot had to simultaneously reduce ability power ratios, nerf support item gold generation, adjust jungle income, and rebalance crit itemization just to let offensive and defensive scaling coexist on the same map again. The damage had seeped into every system so deeply that no single fix could undo it. But if the damage creep meta was a system breaking itself with no single culprit, the next entry is the exact opposite. One champion, one item, one interaction so absurd it became legendary. Sunfire Evelynn meta. This one is a ghost story, and I mean that literally. Back in Season 1 and early Season 2, Evelynn had permanent stealth, not the modern version that breaks when you get too close to an enemy or take damage. Actual, persistent invisibility that stayed active through almost everything she did. You could be standing right next to her and have zero idea she was there. Now here's where it gets horrifying. Sunfire Cape had a passive aura that dealt constant magic damage to all nearby enemies, so what did players figure out? Build Sunfire Cape on the invisible champion. Evelynn would walk up to you, completely unseen, and you just start losing health. No visible source. No champion on your screen. Just your health bar slowly draining while you frantically clicked around trying to figure out what was killing you. And the counterplay? There basically wasn't any. True sight tools in early League were incredibly scarce. Oracle's Elixir existed, but it was expensive, temporary, and you lost it on death. Pink wards had limited availability and couldn't cover the entire map. The only realistic response was dumping excessive gold into vision control before every single fight, and even then, a good Evelynn player could find angles around your wards. The combination exposed a fundamental design flaw that Riot had to learn the hard way. When a defensive mechanic like stealth is paired with passive damage that doesn't require the champion to reveal themselves, counterplay doesn't just get reduced. It completely disappears. The game's entire interaction system breaks down because you can't fight what you can't see or target. Riot's fix was slow but thorough. They introduced more accessible true sight options, expanded the conditions that would break Evelynn's stealth during offensive actions, and eventually reworked her entire kit from the ground up to build counterplay into the core of her design. She went from an invisible damage aura to a champion with actual windows of vulnerability. But if an invisible burn feels unfair, wait until you hear about the season where assassins could delete you before your screen even finished loading the death animation. Assassin meta. Riot reworked 4 assassins during the Season 7 preseason with one explicit goal: add skill expression. Talon, LeBlanc, Katarina, and Rengar all received major kit overhauls designed to reward mechanical mastery and precise combo execution. And honestly, they nailed that part. Watching a great Katarina player chain resets through an entire team was genuinely impressive. Watching a Talon parkour over walls and delete a target in under a second required real practice and real skill. Here's the problem. There was zero equivalent skill expression on the receiving end. LeBlanc could eliminate opponents through pure burst with almost no warning window. Rengar could leap from stealth and one-shot a carry before the target could activate a defensive ability, or even register that the animation had started. Congratulations, you got hit by Rengar. You are now dead. That's the whole interaction. That's the counterplay. There is no step 2. The meta's core loop was brutally simple. One well-played assassin deletes the ADC or support at the start of a team fight. The remaining 4 defenders now have to win a 4 versus 4 against a team that still has all 5 members. They don't. Repeat until the Nexus explodes. In competitive environments where mechanical execution was near flawless, successful assassinations were effectively guaranteed against any non-tank target. The game's outcome didn't depend on what the defending team did. It depended on whether the assassin made a rare mechanical error. That was it. Playing ADC during this meta meant hoping your team's defensive cooldowns lined up at exactly the right moment, or that your opponent misclicked. That was your agency. That was your skill expression. Riot built an entire rework around rewarding skill and accidentally created the most skill-irrelevant meta for defenders in the game's history. The irony is almost impressive. Riot eventually reduced raw burst numbers, increased cooldowns, and raised execution requirements so that assassinations remained impactful but stopped being guaranteed instant deletes. Improved defensive itemization also gave squishier champions slightly more agency in surviving that initial burst window. But if you think assassins deleting you in half a second was bad, wait until you hear about a meta where tanks could do everything assassins did, everything bruisers did, and everything mages did, all at once, for 3 straight seasons. Tank meta, seasons 5 through 7. This wasn't a patch. It wasn't a 2-month nightmare you could wait out. The tank meta lasted 3 full competitive seasons, and during that entire stretch, tanks simultaneously had the highest damage, the highest survivability, and the best utility in the game. Every other entry on this list was miserable for weeks or months. This one was miserable for years. It started with Cinderhulk in patch 5.5. For just 2,200 gold, jungle tanks got 350 flat health, plus a scaling bonus that compounded as games went on. The longer a match lasted, the more efficient the item became. That alone would have been a problem, but it was everything around it that turned a strong patch into a generational disaster. Grasp of the Undying. Let tanks convert raw health into trade damage, meaning building tanky literally made you hit harder. Iceborne Gauntlet's Spellblade passive dealt bonus damage based on base AD, and since the item also handed you armor and a slowing field, tanks got offensive pressure, durability, and crowd control from a single cheap purchase. And Spirit Visage combined with Grasp meant tanks could regenerate to full health through poke damage during extended fights. There was no angle of attack. You couldn't burst them. You couldn't poke them down. You couldn't out-sustain them. They won every single trade by default. Top lane was functionally unplayable as anything except a tank, not slightly disadvantaged. Playing a damage dealer meant accepting an insurmountable deficit that outplaying your opponent couldn't overcome. Professional matches were decided almost entirely in champion select. Teams that drafted superior tanks won. Teams that didn't had to play a different, worse game for 40 minutes. Here's where the real damage happened. An entire generation of players experienced League primarily through this lens. If you loved assassins, carries, or playmakers, your champions were systematically excluded from viable play for 3 straight years. That's not a bad patch. That's psychological exhaustion. The assassin meta before this removed counterplay through instant deletion. The tank meta removed counterplay through unkillable attrition. Different textures of the same oppression, except this one never ended. The fix required simultaneous nerfs to tank item damage output, targeted buffs to tank-busting items and true damage sources, and Riot committing to a genuinely conservative approach to tank power that persists to this day. Small, cautious nerfs compounding over 3 seasons proved categorically less effective than addressing systemic issues at their root. The tank meta is Riot's most expensive lesson in patch philosophy, and it's still shaping how they balance the game right now. But the number 1 spot belongs to something even worse. not a class of champions, not a keystone, a single item so fundamentally broken that Riot didn't nerf it. They deleted it from the game entirely. Deathfire Grasp. Riot has nerfed thousands of items throughout League's history. They've reworked hundreds. They've gutted entire item categories and rebuilt them from scratch. But only one item was ever deemed so fundamentally broken that the only acceptable solution was to delete it from the game entirely. No rework, no stat adjustment, no gradual nerfing over multiple patches, just gone, permanently. And that item is exactly why we're here. Deathfire Grasp cost 3,100 gold. It gave 120 ability power, and an active that dealt 15% of the target's maximum health as magic damage. Then for the next 4 seconds, that target took 20% more magic damage from all sources. Read that again. 15% of your maximum health bar gone instantly, followed by a window where every spell hitting you was amplified by a fifth. The item was originally designed to help mages deal with unkillable tanks. Instead, it became the mandatory first buy for nearly every AP champion in the game, regardless of role or playstyle, because the math was simply too efficient to ignore. Here's where the design fell apart completely. The percentage damage component scaled with the target's maximum health, not the caster's stats. That meant defensive itemization provided almost zero protection. You could build full tank. You could stack every magic resist item in the shop. The 15% max health nuke still ripped a massive chunk out of your health bar before a single ability was even cast. Building tanky against Deathfire Grasp was like wearing a thicker shirt to stop a bullet. Veigar and LeBlanc could one-shot any champion in the game, not just the squishiest target on the enemy team, any champion. Activate Deathfire Grasp. Complete a standard ability rotation within the 4-second amplification window, and the target was dead. The math was predetermined before the fight even started, but it wasn't just elite burst mages abusing this. Even utility mages and AP supports could build Deathfire Grasp and contribute meaningful one-shot threat because the damage amplification window did most of the heavy lifting. You didn't need to be mechanically precise. You didn't need to land every skill shot perfectly. You just needed to press the item button first. A DC's maintaining perfect positioning? Dead. Supports playing enchanters? Dead. Tanks building full defensive items? Still dead. If the Deathfire Grasp user activated the item on you, the outcome was decided by math, not by anything you did in the fight. Team compositions boiled down to one question. Who has more AP and better crowd control to chain during that 4-second window? Whoever answered that question better won. Strategic diversity did not exist. So Riot did something they have never done before or since. They deleted the item entirely from the game in Season 5. No rework attempt, no experimental changes on PBE. No, let's try reducing the numbers. They looked at Deathfire Grasp's percentage damage plus amplification combination and concluded it was structurally incompatible with healthy game design. The replacement was Luden's Echo, which provided burst potential through a fundamentally different and far more counterable mechanism. No other item in League's entire history has been judged so broken that permanent removal was the only fix. And when the developers themselves admit that no amount of balancing can save what they built, that earns the #1 spot uncontested. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.